Rough City Podcast, Episode 5. Keith,
Yes.
I want to tell the Mario Starbucks story.
Well, if you tell the story, you got to tell it accurately.
I'm going to tell it accurately. So here it is 2005. I didn't have a car at the time. So Keith would drive me to all things band related. And we had band practice, I don't know, once a week, twice a week, maybe.
Yeah, in the
And
valley, Carmel Valley.
yeah,
It's my
in Carmel Valley, lived in Monterey at the time. There was this drive-through Starbucks near my house. I was hooked on Starbucks in those days. I'm not anymore. But like clockwork, we would go through the drive-through Starbucks before band practice. And one day, me and Keith are bored talking to each other. We were out of things to talk about, and we were just driving. And what we were listening to at the time in the car was Keith's CD of The Advantage. And if you don't know what The Advantage is, this is a full-piece instrumental band. These younger guys who play cover songs of only old-school Nintendo songs. And they're badass because they play the songs so accurately, and it's hard shit. And the drums are heavy, the production is awesome. So we're listening to that. It's an addictive thing to listen to once you discover The Advantage. So we're listening to that, and when we're about to pull up to the window, and just out of sheer boredom, what happened to be playing from the Advantage CD out of the car was this. So out of sheer boredom, we were like, hey, I think I don't know who said it. One of us was like, hey, we should crank this when we get up to the window and then just don't say anything. Act totally like normal and just see if they say anything. Because who doesn't recognize the Mario Underground sound? So we get to the window. They don't say anything. And we're kind of disappointed. Like, well, this became a tradition that me and Keith would do this. Actually, I'm going to actually use the word not tradition, but obsession. It was like ritualistic. Every single time we would go to that Starbucks, we would be like, dude, anything that was in the CD player, we'd be like, oh shit, we would scramble. Hurry up, throw that out and toss in The Advantage. Let's just try it again. All we wanted was hey, is that Mario? But, and obviously we understood. People are at work. They just got on shift. Even if they do recognize it, I'm sure plenty did. But it never happened. It never happened. Dude, we kept this obsession up for a year. At least. Dude, a year passed. I'm telling you. And it became just a thing, an inside joke between each other, never even expecting a response anymore. We stopped even expecting it. It really just, it was automatic. So the year goes by, and we're going to until the day came. We're going to band practice one day. And we don't even have to say words anymore. We know the window's coming. Just the motions start happening. I'm in the passenger seat. I hand him The Advantage. He does the thing in mid-conversation. We don't even stop talking. You know what I mean? We're not expecting anything anymore. We're still doing it, though, out of tradition. So we threw on the Mario song. We're getting close to the window. We're probably already talking again about whatever we were talking about. Suddenly, the cashier stops. He turns, and he looks out the window, and he goes, Is that Mario? And me and Keith stop talking. We look at each other. Keith turns down the radio, and he turns and looks at the cashier and says, Keith, what did you say?
Our work here is done.
Yep, and we fucking drove off and both went, and celebrated like we had just found out we don't have cancer anymore or fucking won the lottery or something. So elated. It was the biggest and strangest, stupidest victory ever. That of all that time, and that cashier has no idea. He was like, what did that even mean? Probably our work here is done. What the fuck? But
Oh yeah, he got a kick out of it.
how much we appreciated that and knew we never had to do it again. It was over. It was such a reward, dude. What a payoff.
I want to do it again.
Because we couldn't accept it. We could not accept that nobody recognizes this. Like, give me a break.
Yeah, like I'm thinking about doing it up here now, up in the Bay. That's where I live.
You can give it a shot, but as history has shown, we've tested it. We have done this as a sociological experiment, and what we found is it took a year for somebody to give a shit to actually say something.
And that was back in 2000, what, 7, 5? I don't know.
5.
And it's like now it's almost 2020, and nobody even, I think half the millennials out there don't even know about Mario 1 or 2.
It could be, but oh man, how funny! Because I remember us. We were laughing. We were holding our stomachs laughing when we drove off.
Great.
It was so great. It was this. We were in the best mood because what a silly victory. But honestly,
it was a victory that we needed.
It was a victory we needed. Damn right, man. All of that work paid off. He has no idea.
I wonder what that catcher's doing now.
Playing Mario. All right.
Playing Mario.
All right, so that was fun. I just wanted to tell that story. Let's go ahead and get into what we're going to talk about today, which here I have my first bullet point in front of me, which is a question. What's in your 90s CD binder?
Well, back in the 90s.
I'm sure maybe you have the same, kind of a lot of the same answers. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Not necessarily. So back in the 90s, let me think. 98, I was in the 8th grade. 99, 2000. Okay, so end of middle school, beginning of high school. What was in my CD folder or binder, whatever it is, would be the Smashing Pumpkins, the Deftones, Korn.
Wait, slow down. Hold on. Like, which Smashing Pumpkins?
Siamese Dream and Melancholy.
Because I never got into them. That was like, people seem to really be either caught on that wave or not. But it was all part of the same era.
The Smashing Pumpkins, Siamese Dream was, in my opinion, it's still one of the greatest alternative rock albums of that decade. It's just
help me understand that. Like, what is it? Is it the songs?
It's the songs. It's the structuring. It's the vibe. It's the production. The sound of those guitars. The melodies. Everything. It's funny because when you listen to it now, it's very reminiscent of 90s style of music. And with Billy Corgan's voice, you either love it or hate it. But whatever it is, it fits with the music well. And for me, it was just this new sound that I had never heard. A lot of times when I get really like a heavy impact from an album, it's usually because I've never heard anything like it before, and it sort of itches the scratch of like guitar tones. Because I remember what got me into guitar, it was like distortion and all sorts of sounds like that. And Billy Corgan and James Iha they just had these distortions. Well, they were using big muff pedals at the time, running through like Fender guitars, big muff pedal, and it had this really grainy sort of fuzzy sound that I just was addicted to. I was addicted to hearing that sound. And on top of that, the songs were just really well written and kind of progressive, mildly for the time. It's a very emotional album, which I like as well. It has like kind of what I guess what nowadays people would call like post-rock, emo vibes. But I love that album.
Started that, didn't they?
Huh?
But they kind of started that, didn't they?
No, they didn't start it. I mean, they were kind of their own thing. They because Weezer
They
came around
weren't
at the same time.
Nirvana at all. They weren't Nirvana. They were something lighter a little, but maybe not. I don't know. I just didn't. I never caught that wave. Like I said, it's interesting to hear about. All right. So what's up? What else? What else is in your '90s collection?
Um, I'd have to really think. Oh, Silverchair, Soundgarden, the
All right. Well,
Deftones, Korn.
definitely everybody had that Soundgarden. I think that one that had Black Hole Sun on it. I don't remember the name of that album.
Super Unknown, Super Unknown.
Yeah, I think we all had
Yeah.
that at least at one point.
Weezer was a big. Well, the first.
The Blue
Huh?
album, right? The Blue album.
Yes. Yes.
Now that's
Weezer.
one that we and you. That's one I feel like was in all of our CD binders, and anyone in their 30s. That one especially
Yeah.
because
That,
go ahead.
that album had a big impact on a lot of people. It was just a new sound. It was fresh. Again, those guitars were just so heavy and just so unique sounding. I'm
And the
trying to
song
think back then. Back then, I was listening to a lot of. I was getting into a lot of hardcore music. So like,
in the 90s.
yeah, like 98, 99. I was
90s.
listening to a lot of.
I'm sorry when I say 90s, I mean like early 90s, like getting out of the 80s, 90s, like middle school. 99, 98, that's closer to adult.
Well, in that case, it would be Nirvana,
That's what I'm talking about.
And the Foo Fighters. Actually, no, Foo Fighters came a little later, but Nirvana for sure. I'm trying to think who else. Silverchair. I used to be in a Silverchair cover band.
Tell us
Really
because I never really talked to you much about the Silverchair cover band.
Well, we went through a couple different names. It was me and two of my best friends from middle school, Ben Barofka and Andy Fuller, and they were all friends in middle school. They came up to me and was like, "You want to join this band?" I said, "Sure." It was the first band I'd ever been in. We ended up becoming best friends. We'd hang out all the time, and we'd learn. At the time, we were really into alternative rock music, and Ben in particular was obsessed with this Australian rock band called Silverchair. And at the time, they came out with like an album, and it was heavy and grungy, and we decided to learn a bunch of their songs and practice them, and we eventually got permission from the teachers or the principal to play like a little, like half an hour set during lunchtime in the center of the middle school. We played 5 Silverchair songs, and it was awesome. And literally the entire school was there watching us, and it was a blast. We played another 2 shows to the student body, I think a year later. And then we kind of basically disbanded, but we still remained friends for years and years and years.
That's awesome. And can I go ahead and just say, I believe Silverchair should get an award if they made one for band names.
Silverchair.
I don't know why, but I like that band names. In fact, what's everybody's favorite band? Who does everyone think should get an award for band names? Because I already know my favorite band name of all time. I thought of this question because I thought about a lot of different band names, and I'm not going biased to any different specific genre, but I landed on Steppenwolf. I don't know why, but I think that's the hippest for a band name. Because what it is a coyote, and it's I don't know who calls it, some country, right?
Yeah, probably.
I don't remember exactly, but it's the nickname for a coyote, I do believe. And Steppenwolf is just a cool band name. It's cool sounding. Soundgarden, another in my top shelf of best band names. For some reason, I think it's simple and it's kind of on the nose, but really good. Silverchair's a really good band name. I don't know why it is, but it just is. I always thought so.
There's a couple things that I realized I need to add. Back then, I was listening to a lot of what my dad was listening to, which was the old school rock stuff. But then it was the MTV era, so I really got into, for a very short time, I really got into one particular album by Aerosmith, and I got really, a big album for me in the 90s, 2 big albums was actually Pearl Jam 10 and also the album that came after that, and then Stone Temple Pilots Core. Stone Temple Pilots was like one of my favorite bands back in the early '90s, before I got into metal, basically.
Right.
Still there?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's cool, man. We want to move on about the CD binder.
You know what? You're a little distant. I need you to get closer.
I'm here.
There you go. You're clear now.
So is that it? You want to move on about the CD binder, or is that about cover?
Well, to be honest, I can go on and on, but those were the big ones. What about you? Why don't you tell me what was in your? Before you do, I'd like to say in terms of band names, there's so many good ones out there, but I always liked Aphex Twin. I always think that was a cool band name.
That is.
Even though it's not a band, it's just a guy, but it's still cool. Oh, Nine Inch Nails is a really cool band name.
Yes. Hell yeah. That is a good one.
Also, do you remember Salt and Pepper? I'm just kidding.
Too high. You ain't never gonna get it. Was that them?
Never
I'm so white. Oh, I love Salt and Pepper. Well, in my CD binder in the '90s, this is one point I was going to make is there's got to be a lot of same answers for a lot of us, which I think was part. We caught the last wave of that, I think, without trying to go too deep like last episode. I think, like, because if you think about it, back in the day during just records, like in the Buddy Holly in the Crickets days, every kid in the neighborhood had the same records, like literally, because there was only so many. And when a new rock and roll album came out on record, everyone had it. Everyone had Richie Valens. They had the same shit. Everyone had the Beatles, and it lasted like that, I think. And it trickled down, that whole trickle down thing, until, we all had that Weezer Blue album. We all had Nirvana Unplugged. Don't even tell me you didn't.
Actually, I didn't.
First of all, you just shit over my cake, and now you're going to make me eat it too.
I remember watching it, because MTV was a big influencer at the time for everybody, and I remember watching the acoustic Nirvana Unplugged.
Of course, you've seen it.
I thought it was cool to watch, but honestly, I wasn't really into just listening to it because I wasn't.
Right. Let me try again then. I know we all had Nirvana albums, so it's still close to my point, but let me try again for something that we all had. First of all, we definitely had the Blue Weezer album, so that's one. Let me get another slam dunk in here. That one Offspring album.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, Smash.
You had that.
Offspring Smash.
Yeah, you had it.
I had it. Yeah, I did have that one.
Okay, that's what I mean. We all had certainties. There were certainties that we all had. Those are the only two I can really name for sure.
Well, what would you do if I didn't? What would you do if I said I didn't have that album?
I would hang up the phone and move to India. I don't know.
Good idea.
So, that was during the time I was certainly. You're right. It was the MTV era. So that's where we were. It was like that huge bridge from going from Nickelodeon every day to switching the channel to MTV, and every now and then going back to make sure you catch a Darkwing Duck or some shit. But then you're like, you know what? I'm more into watching what's going to come on MTV than Animaniacs today. And you suddenly grow up and you're like, oh, this is kind of sad, but also, I'm kind of interested. What the fuck? And you start learning what new is happening in that whole Nirvana era. But a lot of these albums we all had, and I don't know. There's others I can't really think of right now. As far as Aerosmith, I bought an Aerosmith on cassette when I was like 10 or 11, when I still didn't know. I thought it was something I was supposed to do, was buy an Aerosmith tape. I didn't know what to buy yet. I was still really discovering shit that I was supposed to listen to as a young white American. I don't know. But that sort of, this will segue into my next bullet point.
Okay.
Which is another question for you. Also, these questions are for anyone else who wants to comment on our pages. I don't know if everyone's still listening. I know we've got some loyal listeners. We got to try to get this thing better so more people chime in, because I don't know where I'm going with this. I need to be drinking faster. That's all I know.
There's that ice. There's that. There it is.
But yeah, what was in everyone's 1990s fucking early 90s CD binder? Let's compare. Let's make a comment thread mixtape. I can't believe I just said that. I hope you guys don't stop listening because of that. All right. So that segues into the next point, which was a question. What were you listening to the first time you took music seriously? Like something started to click where it went from just listening to music for fun and listening to things and going on in music started to become more important.
It's a good question. Let me think. I remember feeling something profound from music.
I mean, I'm sure there are layers, not to cut you off, because I've got my memory sort of, but I'm sure there's layers in your different times in your youth, from a little bit younger to a little bit older, but if you can remember.
Well, I'm going to answer it this way. I'm going to say that as far back as I can remember, I've always had this profound feeling that I get from music. Every time I listen to something that catches my ear, and before I even knew much about music, I would just feel it. And when did I start taking music seriously?
Let me just give you. Let me give you an example, and it'll probably something might spring to mind. Does that sound good? Like, I'll give you my example of where I'm going with it. There are layers, like I was saying. In my younger youth, it was Michael Jackson, where things were catchy for sure. Like, but it was also something that it was cool and it was fun. But when songs like Human Nature and songs like Man in the Mirror and Lady in My Life, those definitely, probably because I had musician parents and I grew up around music my whole life, but it happens to anyone where something, like you were saying, something connects with you and something grabs you and you start like having an emotional reaction to it. Everyone has that naturally, but I can say I was certainly hooked on Michael Jackson in my youth, and certain songs stood out, like Human Nature and the melodic ones. But it was when I was in 8th grade, because we went through our early 90s middle school like CD binder where music was still fun, but of course you're always going to grab you whether you understand it or not. But I think the next layer in what I'm talking about was it started when my sister gave me her Jimi Hendrix CD, and this was out of the 90s CD binder. All of our Nirvanas, Hole, Offspring, Weezer, Mazzy Star, all of this other shit. She had a Jimi Hendrix greatest collection, like the Jimi Hendrix Experience greatest collection. I was so into it, and I didn't really know why. I guess I had started really grabbing onto the distortion guitars like you were talking about in the grunge era. So I really heard what was going on with Jimi Hendrix, and I really liked that CD. I was living with my mom and my sister in Florida at the time, but I moved to California that year, coming out of the 7th grade, going into the 8th grade, and I brought my CD collection. And when I first got there, I remember this memory will always stay with me. I was talking to my dad, and he's doing dishes, and I asked my dad, "Hey, Dad, have you ever heard of Jimi Hendrix?" And when he stopped laughing, basically, at the point where he stopped laughing at that question, he says, "Yeah, I heard of Jimi Hendrix. Have you ever heard of Led Zeppelin?" I was like, "No." So he put the dishes down, dried his hands, and immediately took me to the record store. This is a complete true story. And he picked up Led Zeppelin 2 on vinyl and Led Zeppelin 4. And we went home and he played them. And this is also part of this hilarious part of the story. This is totally true. He played the first couple songs on each album, on each record to show me. And he's just going off, fucking, flipping off the downstairs neighbors because he's cranking it. He doesn't give a shit how loud it is. He's just really having fun into it. And I'm like, wow, okay, this is cool. And then he goes, all right, I'll be back. I'm going to reminisce for a while and close the door. And I was like, what the fuck? Little did I know, reminisce. So he's going to twist one up. And he said it just like, awesome. I'm going to go reminisce. And then he played the rest of the albums. So he did show them to me, but he also reminisced. Anyway, at the end of that year, I moved back to Florida to my mom's for 8th grade. And I ended up buying those CDs on my own on CD when they were still brand new. And I had a cassette. I had Led Zeppelin 4 on a cassette. And I remember that because I used to bust it out from my Walkman walking to and from school when I went to I remember listening to Battle of Evermore, which goes into Stairway to Heaven, which I think that's all one side of the cassette, just those two songs. And that is when I noticed something clicking. And it was 8th grade, and it was listening to those songs. I started becoming obsessed with these songs, and it became important. And I remember from that point on, everything else I started listening to, that's where the bridge grew, where it was like going from just listening to songs for fun and more into wanting to learn how to play songs. And it just grew from there. And I think a lot of musicians have those layers. And I definitely remember it being 8th grade. Pink Floyd was definitely the next big milestone. Tool from there. And then from there, it went into metal. But yeah, middle school, 8th grade, that's when I started to want to learn these songs on drums. And my understanding for melody and arrangement, song arranging with a band, distortion guitars, bass, you know what I mean? All the understanding. So also, I know you and me were in school band, and I'm sure you were first chair drummer in every school you went to, right?
In Carmel High School, yeah, and middle school.
So that was probably around the time that, I don't know, you tell me. Like, for me, it was 8th grade, and it was Led Zeppelin. Do you have a moment where you started realizing, like, this is important. These aren't just songs.
I'd have to think about it, but there was no specific moment. I can tell you that. It was something that was just a gradual thing as far back as I can remember. There were albums that had a huge impact on me that I had discovered. And like you with Led Zeppelin, I became obsessed with them, and I studied them, and I tried to figure out.
What year was that?
I don't remember.
Oh.
Yeah, I was young. That's all I know. I was very young. It was definitely in the mid-90s. I mean, I never got that feeling from a band like Nirvana. I just really enjoyed the music, but
right. See, that's what I guess that's kind of the point I'm trying to land on, or at least
I suppose. Well, I suppose that the moment I started taking music. See, I don't know if I even take music seriously now. That's the thing, I'm not sure if I can relate, because music is the most important part of my life, but am I taking it seriously? I don't know. I mean, maybe, but
by taking
all that matters.
By taking it seriously, I mean learning the arrangement just by listening to it, knowing the count of the drum beat, knowing what the feel is, knowing what range they're in, breaking it down in the mechanics, just like the same thing you do when you watch a movie and when you're interested in that. But that's what I mean, like trying to break it down to a science. When did that become important? Because that's what was happening to me as I'm listening to Battle of Evermore. I started wondering, what are the sounds that I'm hearing? Can I separate them with my ears? What is making that sound? What is making that sound? Knowing where the guitars are, the sensibility, trying to pick it apart.
Yeah. Well, in that case, you're trying to the point where I was trying to understand what was going on was probably when it was in middle school, or it might have been before middle school, because my dad gave me a guitar when I was in fourth grade, maybe fifth grade. But then I wanted to play the drums, and then I would start learning drum sections from like Primus, Silverchair. But what was weird was that drums came more naturally to me, and then but I was always really into the guitar. So at the same time, so I remember getting a Fish album, or somehow hearing this album. It's called Junta. It's Fish's first album off their Elektra Records. I think it was '89 when it came out.
You were way into Fish, still.
Yeah, but now Fish, it's different from what Fish is now. I mean, nowadays people think of Fish as this jam band, which they basically are. But that first album was like super progressive and very intricate and dense songwriting, and something about that intrigued me at a profound level. I would listen to these songs and I would go. It basically comes down to it was every time an album has a profound impact on me, it was because I'd never heard anything like it before in any realm of music, and it intrigued me to explore and discover what was going on and how they were doing these things. This guy Trey Anastasio would be doing these arpeggio fugues that there'd be these constant key changes, and at the time I was just like, wow, this is like a roller coaster. But I noticed with my like intuition that the movements that he was going in and out of made sense with the bass and the piano and everything else. And so I started studying these things, and I remember starting to transpose. I started to learn some of Trey Anastasio's guitar parts.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking
about. When I started to learn those guitar parts, I started the process of learning each note on the guitar. It did a couple of things. It strengthened my sense of pitch, my ear training, and it also helped me to understand how the fretboard works and intervals and basic harmony. And then I started to understand how the notes, how they set in relation to what the bass and the piano were doing. And that was a pretty profound moment. But again, it wasn't a specific moment. It was kind of like a process within that year or so where I was learning all these parts on guitar.
Right.
There was a lot of moments like that throughout the course of my musical history. That's one of the earliest ones that I could think of when I started transposing those guitar parts.
Exactly, and that's what I mean. So my moment was walking to and from middle school with Led Zeppelin and the Walkman. But you're right, that was the moment that started this year, and that year is when that same year of middle school is when I was practicing my drum set to all of the Led Zeppelin stuff, all of Rage Against the Machine, the first album, a lot of Red Hot Chili Peppers, Average White Band, my uncle's old funk band that I had on cassette, so I could practice to that. I was practicing drums to whatever the drummer was in whatever band I was listening to, and music started becoming my life. Really, it started as a hobby, or a thing to pass the time, a thing to do instead of PlayStation, because I had my PlayStation time too, after school. But it started going less PlayStation time with my friends and more time in the back room alone, isolated on the drum set with all of that same shit that was in my 90s CD binder. But something out of that, it became less fun and started becoming, I wanted to become a fucking mechanic about all of it. And it was important to me, but I couldn't necessarily share it with anyone because none of my friends at the time, they were all still my party friends. Nobody was a musician. So I couldn't really share this with them. So it was very isolating, but the music. Well,
being a musician, becoming a musician at the level where it's beyond enjoyment, and you have more of an urge for understanding what's going on. That's a much more personal thing, and it's really hard, at least at that age, to get other people to go along with that unless you find other people that are that passionate about music. As you get older, let's say in high school or even beyond college, when people are a little bit more mature and open about things, they can talk to you, especially people in the same field, like in music class. They can talk to you like, oh, isn't it cool how when you hear this, it moves from here to there, and you can sort of relate to somebody. But when you're a really young kid, most kids, yeah, they just want to play on the swings and this and that. And if you find out that you're a musician, not just a music lover at a young age, it's rewarding for yourself. But yeah, it can be isolating, and I remember that too. I remember just wanting to practice, and I wasn't really bummed out about not hanging out with my friends because I was really into learning how this thing works. This music.
Dude, yeah, I remember those moments of that milestone that we're talking about, where I would be outside with my friends and have the feeling that I feel more isolated surrounded by my friends in the moment, because I'm thinking about, I'd rather be in my drum set right now. And you know what? I'm going to. So, all right, I'll see y'all later.
Yeah, lucky for me, I had a lot of friends that, well, I took a lot of music classes in middle school and high school, so I made a lot of friends that were also in music. But
see, I didn't, but I definitely do remember the first time. It was a big deal to me. The first time having some kind of camaraderie and connection with another musician my age, and it was in high school, and it was when our show choir in my high school in San Francisco was Lincoln High, and our show choir was picked to do a contest at Disneyland in this big performance, and they needed a band, so they chose our jazz band. But what they actually did was they hired and paid SOTA, School of the Arts in San Francisco. They hired the band from there, which you have to get a scholarship to be able to go there. And they hired them, but they just used me because I was first chair drummer. At the time, I was actually working at the jazz club my dad worked at. So I had some actual real professional I was playing professionally at night at a fucking cocktail bar, but going to high school still. Pretty lucky, but they ended up hiring me for the show choir at Disneyland. And the bass player from School of the Arts was hilarious. Dude, first of all, this guy was my hero for a school. And this is ninth grade, I think, I was a sophomore. So we're showing up for practice, and the trumpet in the show choir, this is a quick story. The trumpetist in the show choir forgot his trumpet at home. Or no, wait. Firstly, we needed drumsticks. I had no drumsticks because the cabinet was locked. And the bass player's like, "Hey man, I got drumsticks." I'm like, "What's the bass player doing with drumsticks?" "Yeah, I got it in my trunk. Don't sweat it, just in case." Cool. Trumpet player shows up. "Fuck man, I forgot my trumpet at home." Bass player goes, "Hey man, I got a trumpet. It's all good." He had a trumpet in his trunk. Bass player was amazing, and he was he was like 10th grade.
I remember you telling me that before. That's hilarious. You just happen to have all these instruments.
Dude, this guy was hilarious, and he was funny. He's an awesome bass player, and we had to take a road trip because it was San Francisco to Los Angeles or wherever Disneyland is. So we had this huge bus, and I'll never forget this, dude. This huge high school fucking trip, and we stayed at a hotel overnight for this performance. Also, our show choir for Lincoln High at San Francisco got dead last, by the way. And we're on our way, and we're driving on the highway, and it's like all of these high school girls in the show choir singing, "Take the gun, you take the bag, you take the boat, and now you got the facts of life." They're singing the Facts of Life song at the top of their lungs in this huge tour bus, and the bass player, this jazz band's in the back, and the bass player looks at me and he goes, "In space, no one can hear you scream."
That's good.
I'll never forget that guy. All right. Well, look, this is a fun fucking memory lane trip and all, but why don't we move on? Sound good? I'm trying to keep the eye on the clock. I don't know how long we've been going because I've been drinking and we had some technical difficulties.
It's been about, I would say about 45 to an hour. It's fine.
I think that's perfect because we're getting toward the end of our episode here. We're going to do something a little different on this episode. which I'd like to start and bring up from time to time, and that is music documentary recommendations. Because there's a lot of good ones out there. But before I get into that, if I could, quickly, and every time I say for just a second, it's like, oh, Jesus. But I am definitely going to try this time. Before we get into our music documentary recommendations, I would like to quickly eviscerate with my review the movie Yesterday, which is that movie that just recently came out about the young kid who gets in a bike accident and then all the power goes off in the world. And when the power comes back on, nobody remembers the band The Beatles but him. So he decides to steal their music for fame. And I remember showing you all the preview. Did you go see that?
No, I never did.
Dude, okay, look, I was like the most excited one out of everybody, I think, because the trailer sold me. I was like, this looks so charming. I love this concept. Because I think we've all had that idea. And if it wasn't the Beatles, but somebody like, man, I wish or it doesn't even have to be a song, but just what if I went back into time with an invention, or even in the caveman days with a lighter, and to experience that. And I thought this was a great idea. And then I saw the movie, and it was a piece of goddamn boiling horse shit. It was so bad, dude. And I wanted to like it. All I can say is if you saw the trailer, whatever movie in your own mind you made up was better. They basically gave you the whole gist of the movie in the trailer. I don't know if this was just rushed because it was a good idea, but it seems like it was written by a 14-year-old. None of the characters, they were all hollow. The main people, some nice-looking young people, absolutely zero chemistry. And there's just no weight to the movie, even though you felt there needed to be and you wanted there to be. It never, not one part of it that I really like. The concept of the trailer was enough that it just made me sick. And also, the girlfriend, the love interest, I felt it was weird. The irony did not fall on anyone in the movie production about Yoko. Because I felt the whole time the love interest was just fucking all sour because this guy was famous with his music. And I was like, dude, did you guys miss something? She was totally a Yoko. But the thing I hated the most about it was one character, and that was the record executive producer. Now, look, how many times do we need to see in the movie the evil suit record executive producer? Okay, we've seen it. We know they're bad. They want money. But this character, it was a female character, this actress from Saturday Night Live, was so bad, dude. There was one line where she was like, okay, fine. You just want to go back home to your stupid little life? It was so cartoony, boldly outlined, like, we get it. She wants money and she's evil. I'm sorry. I had to pick that movie apart. I hated it. Fuck that movie. All right, let's go. Let's move on to the music documentary recommendations. Okay. And I'll start. And it's going to be The Wrecking Crew. Keith, do you know the name Tommy Tedesco?
It sounds familiar.
That's good. Well, what he is, he has a couple nicknames or a couple, aliases.
Wait,
he's known as...
I think I know who the Wrecking Crew is. Go on.
He's known as the most famous guitarist you've never heard of, which really fits. And until I saw this documentary, I didn't know his name. So he's also called the most recorded guitarist in history. And this documentary talks about him and a bunch of studio musicians that he worked with during a time where music was important. There was no real pop culture yet. Pop culture was being created. This was the Elvis, before Beatlemania, before Elvis, all of that. There was this group of studio musicians, and they got the nickname The Wrecking Crew. But here, let me just list, for fun, some things that Tommy Tedesco played on guitar and was part of that none of us knew, but we were hearing it our whole lives. Starting with some television. Bonanza. We've all heard that, right?
Yeah.
Twilight Zone. That's a guitar.
Really?
And that's Tommy Tedesco on guitar. So let's keep going. Green Acres. These boots are made for walking. MASH. Dun, 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 dun. That acoustic.
Oh, yeah.
Who doesn't like that intro? That's Tommy Tedesco. Batman. That's Tommy fucking Tedesco on guitar.
Wow.
So that's just scratches the surface of television. He also worked with Elvis, the Monkees, Frank Sinatra, the Beach Boys. He was all over that era. Here's some honorable mentions for film scores toward the end of his career that he played on: The French Connection, Godfather, Deer Hunter, Jaws, Field of Dreams.
Wow. So he had an amazing career.
Well, dude, that's what's so great about this documentary. Is when you're watching it, there's some great quotes, by the way, and a lot of hip old musicians that give you stories and some fucking knowledge. But what they talk about how they were all young musicians, showed up for a gig, and then they get these suits showing up from Disney in the recording studio, putting up the money, and they're like, hey, we need you guys to, they have the sheet music, and they'd be like, here, can you guys give this a shot? And they would read the sheet music, they'd look at each other because they're all friends and be like, oh boy, is this corny? This is some cornball shit. All right, well look, let's I think this is what they were trying to do. And they'd start playing and they'd spice it up, and then the suits would go, yeah, just play that again. Perfect. And they'd be like, okay, cool. And they'd make money this way. And the whole time they were hearing about Beatlemania, they're stuck in a studio like, huh? Well, good for them. And they're actually recording the music that's on the Monkees vinyl.
Wow.
It goes into depth, man. It's really, and also there's this bass player back then who's part of the Wrecking Crew, Carol Kay. And for the time, you know, she was born in 1935, and for the time her career span, for it being a female, she was responsible for many of the bass tones that we heard coming out of the era. She used a pick specifically, but that's how you got that boots and made for walking. Boom, 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 boom. That was her, man. And so many different songs. Like she really had her own sound.
That's wild.
So this is just an amazing fucking documentary from start to finish. There's some amazing quotes in it. Like there's one that I think a drummer's actually I think it was Tommy talking about how, look, he's saying how you always keep a gig living in LA. If anyone calls you for a studio gig, you tell them you're 15 minutes away. He's like, I don't care where you are, because as soon as you start saying, yeah, man, I can make it today. Just let me finish breakfast, and then I got to drive across town. And forget it. They're going to move back right to the next name in their little black book. What you say is, I'm 15 minutes away. Even if you're 2 hours away, they're not going to book anybody else. And he was smart, dude. He knew how to keep himself booked. Favorite quote from the movie or the documentary comes from Tommy Tedesco. He's a great talker, too. It's great to listen to him. And he said there's 4 reasons to take a gig. And this is when he's talking about how you should never be ashamed if you're ever on a shitty gig. This is what you remember. There's 4 reasons to take a gig. 1, the connections. 2, the experience. The money. Or for fun. And his point is, and no matter what gig you're on, out of those 4 things, there's something you're going to get out of it. So I highly recommend this documentary, The Wrecking Crew. It's fucking badass, dude. Serious music appreciation. Keith, how about you? What's your music documentary recommendation?
My recommendation would be, the one that I chose was the Defiant Ones. It came out a few years back, and it just aside from the story, it's just amazingly well put together documentary in general. The way it was edited and everything else is really, really cool. and exciting to watch. But aside from that, it just focuses on the story of two people in particular, Dr. Dre and a guy named Jimmy Iovine. And Dr. Dre, everyone who's listening probably knows who he is. He's famous for NWA and then his solo career. He's worked with Snoop Dogg and everybody else. And then Jimmy Iovine was a recording engineer and music producer. And kind of like the Wrecking Crew, it's unbelievable, this guy's resume. He worked with, when he was starting out, in the position that he was in, he ended up working with and engineering music for John Lennon, Bruce Springsteen, Tom Petty, the girl from shoot, I'm blanking here. What's her name? Stevie Nicks.
Yeah.
And then he went on and on and on. I mean, the list goes on and on of the people that he worked with. It's unbelievable. He's engineered some of the most famous rock albums in history. And then he later on started getting into the rap game, and that's sort of how he became connected to Dr. Dre. And he continued to produce all these amazing rap albums along with Dr. Dre. And then, of course, sort of around the same time, the documentary focuses on the founding of NWA and Dr. Dre's life and career as a rapper and a producer. And then the documentary sort of caps with Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine. I guess they were both working on these Beats by Dre headphones that he was trying to market. And they became widely popular. He made a massive amount of money putting those things out. And just in general, the story behind these two people in the music industry is just absolutely incredible. And they interview every person you could think of in the hip-hop and the rock scene of the last 20 years. They interview everybody, and it's just so fascinating and fun to watch. I highly recommend it for people who are very nostalgic about music of the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s.
Dude, I loved the Defiant Ones, and it was you and Nate who recommended it. I remember you messaging me, like, trying to drive it home because I hadn't seen it yet, and you're like, dude, fucking everyone is in this. Everyone, like, all caps.
Everyone,
and
it's crazy.
And watching it was so enjoyable, really. And I do believe it's on Netflix now. It all ends. I don't want to spoil too much, except that, of course, it all builds up to, for the time it was made, Eminem, and hearing his appreciation and hearing the story of his first time stepping foot into coming from a demo tape from freestyle shows that happened to get to Dre somehow. Someone going, bro, you got to listen to this guy. And then Dre calling him and Eminem's first experience in the studio and that story, you guys got to see that one. So worth it. It is so entertaining and inspiring, and also just, I don't know, man, I love watching a great success story.
Sure.
It's always good. So those are our music documentary recommendations. If anyone else has one that springs to mind from this conversation, post it in our comments, and we might check it out, and we'll give our review and recommend it to everybody else. That's how this works. And I got to piss so bad, but we're going to go ahead and keep moving. We're going to move to the end of the episode, which always is reviews and recommendations coming from listeners. So starting with Mauricio, he posted on Facebook, he recommends, I haven't heard this name dropped in a long time, DJ Shadow and the album The Private Press. Keith, what did you think?
I think it's great. It's one of those albums where it was just really, really clever, linking up of old school tunes as well as just really sick beats. I remember that was a big deal when it came out, and he was a big deal for a while. But then I haven't heard much from him recently. But it is a very entertaining album. And he came out with another one, didn't he? Before or after that?
I don't know. I know his career stretched into the 2010s.
Okay, yeah. No, it's a really fun album. It's really cool, and it's also chill at the same time. It's a great album for listening to while you're driving or, you know, one of those sort of things, to me at least. That's really,
yeah.
To be honest, that's really all I have about it.
Yeah, it was great to revisit DJ Shadow. And listening through this album was so fun. Like this guy, this is he predates dubstep. This is before that era. This was one of the highest paid DJs at the time in the 90s. And he started his career in 1989. He's from San Jose, California. I can understand why Mauricio really hung on to this guy because Mauricio is a drummer. And you're going to get great fucking drum beats and feels and vibes from the guy. And he uses some jungle. He uses lots of breakbeat. And, like I said, before dubstep. So he survived that too. Like I remember you can find, if you ever search DJ Shadow on YouTube for live shows, you will find some great stuff to throw on in the background. This guy's great. Smoking music. By that, I mean fucking weed, of course. This album particularly, dude, The Private Press, I can tell you this much. If you're on a date and you get her back for drinks, if you throw on The Private Press, DJ Shadow, you're getting laid. And I got to tell you, go ahead.
It is really cool music. And the drum parts, I do remember the drums were the drum samples were just super cool and just, I don't know, just fun.
Right. My favorite tracks are Fixed Income and Give Up the Ghost. A lot of melodic stuff, a lot of hip-hop influenced stuff. He's old school. He scratches. He makes his own stuff. This is a musician on turntables. And it's a great thing to go back to. There's something vintage about it. He's been on film scores before, and he should be like Trent Reznor. That was kind of something Nate messaged me, his top film scores of all time. I don't have them in front of me. I should have wrote them down, but Trent Reznor was on that list. And I thought about him on last episode when I was talking about film scores, because David Fincher, who happens to be my favorite film director, is using Trent Reznor now. He started using him, and now he went from Nine Inch Nails to movie soundtracks, which is great. That is the evolution that we were looking for. And I think DJ Shadow could go there too. He has been here for a long time. That's where he should live, because boy, he could come through. A lot of the stuff sounds very film soundtrack to me. And also I wanted to say, Mauricio, I hate to bounce back after somebody's recommendation with another one, because that could go on forever, but you got to check out Phaela, which is spelled Phaeleh. Phaela. Check out the album The Cold in You. But coming from a DJ Shadow fan, you're going to love this guy. It's right up that fucking alley. So we both recommend DJ Shadow for anyone who hasn't checked him out, especially this album, The Private Press. And that's going to move on to the second listener recommendation. This comes from Johnny Lawless on Facebook. And he says, with an exclamation mark, Frederick Thorntonall Special Defects, Soul Niger Within. Keith, go ahead.
Yes, which I believe somebody told me once that it actually means something dark within. I'm just not sure why Frederick Thornton decided to write it in that weird way, but
Can I just say that's bizarre, because the reason I ever named Soul Asunder, the band, was because I took soul from that, because I was a fan of that at the time, and combined soul with the word asunder. And that doesn't mean sun? How weird.
no, it does in certain languages, but I that's just what I heard. I'm not sure if that's what it means. It might mean, it also might mean dark sun within. I don't know, but
All right, well, go ahead.
the I remember hearing about this album a long, long time ago. And at the time, of course, it was one of these things that was just, it was like this weird, sort of mysterious album that it was kind of hard to find at the time. And it was it was produced and released by the guitar player from the band Meshuggah, the lead guitar player. His name is Fredrik Thorndal, Swedish guitar player. And if you know anything about Meshuggah, you would know that this guy's really into heavy metal music that's kind of polyrhythmic and very chunky at the same time. But one thing I noticed is that at the time when it came out around the same time that Destroy, Erase, and Proof came out, and you can sort of hear that. But the Soul Niger album is basically one continuous song, or it's kind of three movements, and so each track goes into the next track as if the song keeps on going. Another thing I noticed about this album, interesting thing, is that if you listen carefully, you'll notice that with the exception of like two tracks, every single track is the same tempo.
Wow, I never noticed that.
Every single track. Now the first half of the album is in like 6/8 time or whatever. It's a 4/4 feel with like 6/8 compound time or whatever, or swing time, I guess. And the second half of the album is just like straight 4/4, with obviously Meshuggah-esque polyrhythms going in and out and repeating patterns. But both of those sections are in the same tempo. And it's a great album for people who are into, well, Meshuggah, but also it's an interesting album because it was kind of I'm not sure exactly what the inspiration was to put it out. He probably just had a lot of ideas at the time and just wanted to put something out solo. But you hear a lot more of his sort of avant-garde jazz influence, particularly in his soloing. People like Alan Holdsworth, you hear a lot of sort of Holdsworth influenced soloing on this album. There's some weird jazzy moments. It's much more of a fusion jazz / metal album, whereas Meshuggah is more just like straight up like heavy metal. And it's great. I mean, the production is amazing. I love the sound of the drums. He got this guy named Morgan Ogren to play drums on this album, and it's one of my favorite drum performances of any metal album, because this guy, he'll play the beats, along with the guitar, but then there'll be sections where he's able to sort of improvise. And a lot of times, and this is actually one of the first times I've sort of heard this when I discovered this album at the time. And it was really interesting as a drummer. What he'll do is he'll play a solo, but he'll start to warp the time and he'll flam in a weird way, and he'll basically get out of time. It'll sound like he's like falling down a flight of stairs, or he's just sort of
Oh, that's so true.
Or sort of he's just chopping things up, but he always lands on the downbeat on the one of the next measure. So no matter how off he gets in his drum solo, he always lands on the one, which I thought was really, really impressive. And the only other person that I've heard play like that in the jazz realm would be somebody like Dennis Chambers. He does that a lot too, where he'll play out of time. But he's really still in time. He's still counting, and he's still keeping a tempo.
It's loose.
It just sounds like he's going out on purpose, and he comes back. and it's really it's kind of one of those advanced drum techniques where if you're really really good at keeping time, you can sort of pull that off. And this guy pulls it off in a really creative way. I also, it's super heavy and it's a very dark album too. It's again, it's like Meshuggah, but it's not, because the vocals are way more sort of demonic and sort of animalistic. There's lots of weird sounds going on. There's also a lot of weird keyboard synth parts going on.
Very fusion, though.
It's very fusiony. It's basically like it's like Meshuggah if it was much more of like a fusion jazz,
great
synth progressive group.
Great simile.
Yeah, and I love it. It's one of my favorite albums. I still listen to it today, even though it came out like 20 years ago. I believe it was ahead of its time too. Nothing like it had come out before it. It's unbelievable. It's musically very engaging. It's very creative, and it's the kind of music that sort of makes you think, like, how did you pull that off, or what is? It's music where musicians want to dig in. They're like, oh, what kind of chord is that, or what scale is that? How does that work over this? And it's a very, very interesting and engaging album. And I would recommend it to anybody who loves heavy metal, but people who are particularly interested in the more progressive, more angular, sort of mathy metal sort of stuff, they would really like it.
Yes, and let me go ahead and just start mine with the annoying metaphor so that I can, because Keith's great. Keith's technical, well-spoken, calculated, and gives you some precise definition of shit. Very precise way to give you an interview. And I just show up and go, this shit is fucking, man, diarrhea was a good thing. No.
Yeah,
But yeah. So this is okay, firstly, let's just say this. This is the birth of djent. Here's my metaphor. You know that image you have? This is the image I have, I think a lot of people have in their mind, of the primordial ooze of life, where it's like a volcanic scenescape with black lava, lava stone or lava rock, whatever you call it, and fucking this pit of ooze is bubbling and boiling. That is what Soul Niger within is for djent. This is where it all was brewing, right here. Because you could say, yes, Meshuggah created djent, but that's kind of a broad statement, because I think the very specific definition of that, the full definition of that, is Soul Niger created djent, not necessarily Meshuggah. Because I believe what you're talking about, it's like they took things out of Meshuggah moments, and decided to go, let's amplify, let's underline this, let's highlight this part of Meshuggah, and that gave a chance for Thorntonall to really fly with his Alan Holdsworth influence. And he found Morgan Argan on drums to be able to just accentuate that. So it just feels like this bubbling lava is overflowing with Morgan Argan's fills. And you're just like, something. And dude, it kept overflowing and boiling over until the entire djent scene came out of it, starting from Periphery.
I wouldn't be surprised if every guitar player and drummer in a djent band, let me rephrase that. I would be surprised if any djent band hasn't heard of Soul Niger Within. In fact, I'm very confident that everyone in any djent band not just knows about Meshuggah, but knows about that particular album, Soul Niger Within, because it's one of those albums that that sort of metal scene is just, they all know about it. They all know that it was this diamond in the rough that only happened once, and it was this little moment that just created a weird, bizarre style of music that was so intriguing and so different at the time that people were like, this is too cool. And then, of course, when someone comes up with good ideas and the idea becomes popular, it's human nature. People want to emulate that. You hear that with every style of music you can think of. And that's exactly what happened with with this album, the Soul Niger with an album. It's funny because it's also kind of the album's also kind of it's a challenging listen because there's lots of moments where it's really harsh and dissonant, and the guy screams over it, and you're just like, oh, this is. But
really see, at the time when I discovered it, that's when I was very, very into aggressive music. So if you are a fan of metal and aggressive music, that it will grab you on that level too. But and this is all true. Exactly what you just said. It's exactly right. And it was a huge tremor in the scene, and it really did spawn a whole genre almost a decade later, or maybe even more than a decade later. Like Keith said, it is got some demonic vocals. Let me talk about the vocals for a minute. I fucking love it that what the singer is doing is much like there's one Meshuggah song. It's one of my favorite Meshuggah songs, The Exquisite Machinery of Torture, where instead of a full-on scream, he's sort of doing a creature whisper.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're hearing it's the only time you'll ever hear anything like it, where it's a guy doing a creature whisper, a creaturous high pitch, like the Crypt Keeper whispering to you. Imagine what that would sound like. And heavy, thick, rhythmic fucking flows, dude. I'm not going to try to do it right now because I don't want to even butcher it. You got to hear it. It's really fucking badass. Sometimes he screams, yes, but there's a lot of distortion and filters and echo and effects on it. But when he's doing the verses, it's like he's flowing. It's like a flow. I'm not going to say rap, but it's more of a flow. There's fucking flow in it and a very rhythmic, but it's a fucking demon's whisper. That's a funny line. I think it's from Always Sunny. I thought you were going to move in like a demon's whisper. Talking about robbing somebody or something. I don't know. But Soul Niger Within, man, it is aggressive. Man, is it angry. Oh, yes, it is. But you don't have to be angry to listen to this. Some of it, if you're not angry, if you're not a metal person, you're going to be taken back. But believe me, there's some absolute fusion things going on the highest level. This was the creation of Gent. This one fucking album was the creation of Gent. It's the birth of Gent. There would be no Gent without it.
I might have to actually challenge you on that. I get what you're saying. In general, it might be one of the most.
When we're trying to close the fucking episode, no, I'm just kidding.
It might be one of the most important albums for the birth of the Gent movement, but. And you've said this before, that some of those Pantera albums had some some of the building blocks for Gent as well.
Okay, but you know what? You're right, but it was Pantera who influenced Frederick Thorntonall, who created Gent.
And Metallica.
So the pecking order is different. You're right, but Pantera was first. They were first. Pantera was the chicken. Thorntonall was the egg. And I'm the dick. No.
Gotcha.
All right. So that is a special Frederick Thorntonall Special Defects, the Soul Niger Within. Please listen to that. Any drummer, anyone into rhythm, anyone who's into fusion, and anyone who's pissed, this is a great combo for you. But it also was a groundbreaking pioneer album for its time. And speaking of time, Keith gives us the final word and we'll wrap it up.
I got a few words.
All right.
Well, firstly, I was thinking about this, and normally we review albums that people recommend. But I actually have an album for you that I would want you to consider reviewing.
Uh-huh.
And I'll review it as well. And we're getting a little away from the heavy stuff, and we're getting into some more rock stuff. And I would like for you to listen carefully. I know you've heard it before, but give it another listen. And I would like to hear your review of Clairvoyant by the band The Contortionist.
Okay, definitely. I love The Contortionist. Language is this, or is it language or languages? I don't know. I can't remember.
Oh, language, yeah.
Language is a big tamale for me, but I do love The Contortionist. I will check that out. And you don't have to be shy to recommend shit. We will definitely have our picks, bro. Every other episode, I think me and you we're gonna get selfish, but we do also have a list building of listeners who my dad actually wants us to check out a Charles Mingus album, which I want to put that on the list for you for next week, and me also, and also our special guest, which will be on next episode. And that's going to be a very special episode, and we're excited about that. We're not going to spoil the surprise, but we're going to give him this homework too. Charles Mingus album, and the other album from listeners who I don't want to spoil yet. But dude, this is the idea. You're getting us to listen to stuff, and we're trying to connect you guys with each other because me and Keith are worthless. All right, just kidding. So look, not bad. What's that? Final word.
I just want to know which Mingus album it is.
I'll link you.
Okay, cool.
But as always, please hit us up, either YouTube or Facebook. Give us any recommendation that you would like to hear us review, and we'll check it out. So, hey, Keith, late.
Peace, man.